The wind howled like a dying animal across the flat plains of eastern Missouri. It was the kind of cold that bit into bone and made even the bravest farmer dread the long night ahead. Beneath the hollow silence of a starless sky, two figures sat huddled near a low-burning fire outside a crooked wooden farmhouse, the kind that leaned as if burdened by secrets. Thomas Wilkes shifted closer to the flame, his cracked hands trembling as he rubbed them together. Beside him, his wife Eleanor stared blankly into the orange flicker. Behind them, the worn-down house groaned under the weight of the wind, the windows like hollow eyes watching the dark. Inside, 6 small children slept under threadbare quilts. Their bellies were empty. Again. There had been no supper. Not tonight. Not for the past 2 nights. The potato sack was bare, and the chickens in the coop had long since been slaughtered. The land had failed them, and the world had turned its back. Thomas spoke first, his voice low and gritty. "We can't keep going like this, Ellie." She didn't look at him. "I know. There's gotta be a way." He stared out into the night, jaw clenched. "We ain't got nothing left but the land. And the land won't feed us." A long silence passed. Then Eleanor spoke, a whisper barely above the wind. "What if the land could be used for something else?" Thomas turned to her. Her face, usually soft, was hard now, pale and still, like frost on a gravestone. "What are you saying?" She looked him in the eye, her voice steady as death. "I'm saying, folks out here go missing all the time. Travelers, drifters, men with full pockets and no one waiting on 'em." The fire crackled between them, casting tall shadows on the snow-packed earth. Somewhere behind them, a baby whimpered in its sleep. Thomas said nothing, but the way he stared into the fire told her everything. The seed had been planted, and the ground was ready. The next morning came without light. The sun struggled behind heavy gray clouds, casting the land in a dull, lifeless hue. Frost clung to the window panes, and inside the house, breath turned to mist. The children stirred slowly, their faces pale and eyes sunken, too weak to complain anymore. They were used to the hunger now. It had settled into their bones like the cold. Thomas sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty plate in front of him. Eleanor moved quietly behind him, boiling what little was left of yesterday's water, just to create the illusion of warmth. She wasn't crying anymore. The tears had run dry weeks ago. When the children were outside, pretending to play, but mostly just waiting for night to come and sleep to take away the ache, Thomas leaned forward. His voice was low and grim. "We'll need to find someone no one'll come looking for." Eleanor nodded slowly. "There's always travelers passing through on their way west. Rich ones. Think they're too good to talk to locals. We watch the road. We'll see 'em. Just need one." They didn't speak the word murder. They didn't have to. It lingered in the silence between them, thick and undeniable. By week's end, they had a plan. Thomas borrowed a horse and rode to the edge of town, to the crossroads where weary strangers camped for the night before heading west. Eleanor prepared the land. Not the fields, but the back stretch of their property where the trees grew too close together and the soil turned black and soft after rain. She brought out the shovel and dug. Not too deep, but wide enough. Wide enough for a man. The children watched her from the window. The eldest, Jacob, 13, tilted his head. "Why's Mama digging out there?" he asked. His younger sister shrugged. "Maybe planting something." But Jacob knew better. He'd heard whispers last night, words no boy should hear. He stayed cool. That night, Eleanor made a stew, from nothing, and yet it smelled like hope. The children ate eagerly. No one asked where the meat came from. No one wanted to know. The man arrived just past dusk, a traveler on horseback, cloaked in dust and exhaustion. He was headed for California, he said. Gold dreams in his eyes, worn boots on his feet. His name was Walter Crane, a merchant's son from Ohio, said he had family waiting near Sacramento, spoke with a kind smile and a leather pouch heavy with coin. Thomas found him by the main trail, helped him fix a bent stirrup, offered him food and rest, said he lived just a few miles north, had space in the barn and a warm meal on the fire. Walter thanked him, grateful. He never noticed the way Thomas's eyes scanned his saddlebag, or the way his fingers gripped the reins just a little too tight. By the time they arrived at the farmhouse, the sun had dipped low behind the trees, and the sky was bleeding orange and ash. Eleanor greeted them kindly. She even smiled. The children had been sent to bed early. Walter ate heartily. The stew was better than anything he'd tasted on the road. He complimented Eleanor's cooking. She nodded politely, eyes flicking once toward Thomas, who stood by the hearth in silence, sharpening a rusted axe. When it was time to sleep, Walter was given a blanket and led to the barn. Said he didn't mind roughing it. Thanked them again. The door closed behind him and locked. Thomas didn't hesitate. The axe was swift, silent. Eleanor helped him wrap the body in tarp. Together they dragged it past the henhouse, across the frost-bitten yard, and into the shallow grave she'd dug days earlier. The soil welcomed the dead like it had been waiting. The next morning the children found a silver coin placed beside each of their wooden plates. "Where'd this come from?" asked little Ruth. Eleanor smiled gently. "A gift from the Lord," she said. Jacob, the eldest, didn't speak. He stared out the window toward the back field, where the dirt was now smoother than before. The wind blew hard that day, as if trying to whisper something, but no one was ready to listen. Not yet. Winter passed slowly, like a bad dream that refused to end. The frost clung longer than usual that year, and the Wilkes children grew quieter with every sunrise. But their bellies were full. For the first time in months, there was bread, meat, and the smell of food lingered in the corners of their wooden home like incense in a church. Thomas and Eleanor had made a silent vow, once a month. One man, never locals, never anyone with kin nearby. Travelers mostly, strangers, those no one would miss. And so the ritual began. Each month, Eleanor prepared the grave, always in a different spot on the far edge of the land, always dug by her hands, bare and chapped. The smell of fresh earth began to linger on her clothes. She spoke less now, moved more like a machine than a woman. Thomas, meanwhile, took to watching the roads, sharp-eyed and patient. He knew how to spot the wealthy, the clean coats, the polished boots, the confidence of men who'd never had to starve. He offered hospitality like a viper offering warmth. Some of them were friendly, some were rude. None of them ever saw the second sunrise. 12 months passed. 12 graves were dug and filled. 12 coin purses taken, counted, and buried again, this time beneath loose floorboards in the barn. It was money enough to fix the roof, buy supplies, even a few goats. No one in town suspected a thing. The Wilkes were just getting lucky with the land, folks said. But Jacob knew better. He'd watched them, heard the noises in the barn late at night, the whispering, the dragging sounds. Once, he even crept outside and saw his father kneeling beside a hole in the ground, panting, covered in mud. The land was changing. It felt heavier. The trees at the edge of the field no longer rustled. They stood stiff, like sentinels. The birds didn't sing. Even the air smelled different, more hollow. One evening, Jaco, B, sat alone by the window and stared out toward the fields where no crops grew. He whispered to no one, "What are you feeding it?" and the wind, sharp and sudden, slammed the shutter closed. By the time the second year began, the Wilkes land had become something else entirely. It was no longer just soil and stone. It was a ledger, written not in ink, but in flesh. The graves, though scattered, began to shape a quiet map, each one a marker of guilt and greed. The earth held them close, but it did not forget. Neither did Jacob. He was 14 now, tall for his age, with his father's eyes and his mother's silence. But his soul had grown tired, old in a way no boy's soul should ever be. He kept to himself, haunted by dreams he could never fully recall. Sometimes he'd wake in the middle of the night, covered in sweat, the scent of dirt and rot clinging to his clothes. Though he hadn't left his bed, something was wrong with the land. Goats gave birth to stillborns. Chickens refused to lay. Trees once lush now sagged like they were mourning. Even the well water had turned bitter, not poisoned, just wrong. It smelled of rust, like something ancient stirring beneath the roots. Thomas didn't notice, or didn't care. He was busy counting coins. He'd begun keeping a book, a black leather ledger, its pages yellowing and thick with scrawled handwriting. It tracked every traveler, every coin, every grave. He locked it in the old chest beneath the bed. Eleanor never asked about it, but Jacob had seen her holding it once, staring long enough that her fingers trembled. They were no longer just surviving. They were building something, a legacy of blood, and that legacy had begun to whisper. One night, as Jacob walked past the field to fetch firewood, he stopped dead in his tracks. The ground, flat and empty just hours ago, now bore a line of freshly disturbed dirt. It hadn't rained. No animal tracks, just a single, clean mound, like something had risen and sunk back down. He stood there for minutes, heart hammering. The wind didn't blow, the trees didn't creak. Then he heard it, a slow shifting, like earth grinding against bone, a sound no living thing should make. He ran. Thomas Wilkes had changed. Where once he spoke only of survival, now he talked of expansion. He wanted more land, more horses, more space to build upon. But he never said what exactly he meant to build. He stopped going to town, no longer trusting outsiders. He started sleeping less, eating more, always chewing with his mouth open, eyes darting around like he was being watched. He was. Jacob had begun keeping a second ledger, hidden under a loose board behind the barn. In it, he wrote every detail he could remember, times, faces, names, if he overheard them, locations of the graves, though he never dared dig. He didn't know what he would do with it yet, but something told him he'd need it one day. Because the land wasn't quiet anymore. At night, he heard things, not footsteps, not animals, something lower. Like the ground beneath the farmhouse had grown a voice. Sometimes it was soft, a hum almost, and sometimes it shook the floorboards just enough to rattle the water in the cups. But no one else seemed to notice, not his siblings, not even Eleanor. Eleanor, who now walked the property barefoot every morning, dragging her hand across the fence posts as if counting something only she could see. She hummed while she worked, tuneless and low. She hadn't smiled in months. She didn't need to. The house was always warm now, and the pantry never empty. One morning, Jacob caught her whispering to the dirt behind the barn. He stayed hidden, but close enough to hear. "They said you needed more," she murmured. "Said the last one wasn't full. We'll fix it. We'll find another. Tonight." Jacob's skin went cold. He backed away, branches snapping underfoot, and her head snapped up. She didn't see him, but for a moment she didn't look like his mother anymore. Her eyes were glassy, unblinking, and her lips moved long after she stopped speaking. That night, Jacob placed a knife under his pillow, not because he feared something would come in, but because something beneath them wanted to come out. It wasn't just murder anymore. Not for Thomas. He had begun calling it the offering. Each month, on the 12th night, he would sit at the edge of the field with his ledger, counting coins, checking names, noting the dates. He never spoke to the children. He barely acknowledged Eleanor. His entire life had become the pattern. 12 nights, 12 men, 12 graves. No more, no less. The number comforted him, like it meant something bigger, something holy. Eleanor had stopped asking questions. She simply dug, and the land accepted. But Jacob noticed something strange in his father's ritual, a shape forming. The graves, once scattered, now made a circle, a perfect circle. In the center was nothing but bare dirt, untouched, as if waiting. One night, he crept out with a lantern and followed the path from grave to grave. It was too perfect to be random, as if some force had guided his father's hand. That night, he wrote in his own ledger, "The 12th has meaning. It's not just habit, it's design." The next traveler was a preacher. He wore a black coat and spoke kindly, said he was headed west to plant churches in the new towns. He smiled at Eleanor, gave candy to Ruth. He read scripture at the dinner table. Thomas slit his throat in the barn while he prayed. That night, the house felt different, heavy, hot, despite the snow falling outside. And then, it happened. A sound from beneath the floor, louder than before, rhythmic, breathing. Jacob woke in a sweat. The window pane beside his bed was fogged from the inside. The air reeked of wet soil and blood. He pressed his ear to the wooden floorboards and listened. Thump, silence. Thump. Not footsteps, not voices. A heartbeat, slow, ancient, buried deep. In the center of the grave circle. He backed away, eyes wide. In the next room, he could hear Thomas humming to himself. 12 again. 12A. Wesno. Jacob whispered aloud, unsure if it was to himself or whatever was listening beneath the earth. What happens when it's full? By the 3rd year, the Wilkes family was rich. Not outwardly, not enough to draw attention, but within the hollow walls of their farmhouse, gold coins stacked neatly in jars, sacks of silver stashed beneath floorboards, watches, rings, and polished boots traded for seed, lumber, new linens. They still dressed plainly, still claimed they kept to themselves. But word in town was that Thomas Wilkes had turned his land around like a miracle. Folks started calling him the Quiet Baron. No one questioned it. People in those parts were used to mystery. They let it hang like fog, never too close, never too far. But the land around the Wilkes farm had begun to change. The grass that grew near the grave ring was thick, darker, wetter, as though always freshly rained. Wildflowers bloomed there even in winter, their petals too red, too full. Animals refused to cross the backfields. Deer would freeze at the edge of the woods, then turn around, trembling. And at night the Wilkes house creaked from within, as if swelling and shrinking with breath. Thomas didn't notice. He was obsessed with building. He spoke of expanding the barn, maybe adding a smokehouse. More space for harvest, he'd say, tapping the black ledger like it contained blueprints. Eleanor had grown thin, quiet, too quiet. She stopped looking anyone in the eye, even her children. When she spoke, it was often to the field, the same words repeated like a lullaby. One more, just one more. The children felt it, even if they didn't understand. Ruth stopped sleeping through the night. The twins wet their bed, which they hadn't done in a year. The baby cried at walls for no reason. Jacob, now nearly 16, wrote everything down. Every tremor in the house, every odd shadow, every date in the black ledger that matched one in his own. It was all building toward something. And one night, he followed his father out to the circle, watched him kneel in the center and press his hand against the soil. Thomas whispered, and something whispered back. It was storming the night Jacob finally opened the chest. His father had left it unlocked, a rare mistake. Perhaps he thought no one dared, or perhaps, in his growing delusion, he believed no one needed to. Either way, Jacob waited until the thunder cracked loud enough to mask the creak of wood as he lifted the lid. Inside lay the black ledger. The leather was soft, like skin worn thin with oil and age. He opened it with trembling hands. The pages were heavy, each one inked with names, dates, coin values, and symbols, some simple, others strange. Not English, not even Latin. Shapes that curled like snakes or branched like twisted trees. At first, it made sense. One entry per man. But then came the second half. Pages filled with drawings, circles, layered rings, eyes staring outward, symbols repeating again and again. Always 12, then another 12. And in the margins, tiny manic script written in a hand that didn't look like his father's. Each offering brings warmth. The land listens. It remembers. The center is not empty. It waits. Jacob flipped faster. One page read, "When the blood fills the ring, the door will open. The one beneath will rise." And beneath that, in red ink, "We are not killers. We are chosen. Our bloodline is its keeper." He slammed the book shut, breath ragged. Lightning split the sky. Somewhere outside, he heard his mother humming again. The same tune, the same rhythm. This time, he recognized it. It matched the symbols in the margins. A chant. He ran to the window. Thomas stood in the center of the ring, shirtless, arms raised, blood dripping from his palms into the soil. Eleanor knelt beside him, whispering into the dirt. The storm howled, the wind screamed, and from beneath the earth, something answered. Not words, not even sound. A pressure, like a hand pressing against the underside of the world. Jacob stumbled back, heart racing. They weren't just burying bodies. They were feeding something. For days after the storm, Jacob couldn't sleep. The image of his parents kneeling in the grave circle haunted him like a fever. The blood, the whispers, the thing beneath the soil responding with its weight alone. That unholy silence pressing upward, something alive. His siblings didn't understand. They laughed, they played, they still saw their parents as quiet, strange farmers who fed them well. Only Ruth seemed to sense something deeper, clinging to Jacob's arm at night, whispering, "The floor talks when I sleep." The ledger never left his thoughts. He had hidden it again, not under the bed, but far from the house, tucked into a hollowed-out tree trunk past the creek. It burned in his mind like a wound. His father's writing, those symbols, and that word, keeper. Why was their family chosen? What had started this? One morning, he confronted Eleanor while she churned butter alone in the kitchen. Her hands moved in lazy, hypnotic circles. "Why do you do it?" he asked. She didn't look up. "Do what?" "The killings, the graves, the blood, all of it." She paused, her fingers stilled. Then, softly, she said, "Because we were told to." Jacob's voice cracked. "By who?" Now she looked up, and her eyes were black-ringed and sunken, as if she hadn't truly slept in years. "Not who," she said. "What?" "The same thing that kept us from dying in the snow. The same thing that turned our land green when the others turned to dust. The same thing that feeds your baby brother without asking anything from him, yet." She reached forward and touched his face, fingers ice cold. You'll hear it soon, too. It always chooses the blood it loves." Jacob backed away. "You're insane." She smiled, not cruel, but tired, worn thin. "No, I was starving. And then I listened." That night, Jacob buried a knife behind the barn. Not for the thing in the ground, but for the people who fed it. Spring came early that year. The snow melted fast, and with it, the ground around the Wilkes farm grew thick with life. The trees bloomed too early. Flies swarmed like they were drawn to something sweet or something spoiled. The grass over the grave ring was shin-high, unnaturally green. Nothing grew that fast. Nothing grew that full. And yet, Thomas wasn't pleased. He paced the fields each night with his boots off, muttering to himself, the black ledger clutched in one hand like a sacred book. Eleanor followed him now, her hair down, her dress stained with earth. They no longer slept indoors. They claimed the house was too loud, as if the walls had begun whispering things only they could hear. Jacob avoided them both. But one night, he heard something that stopped him cold. His father was standing in the grave ring, shouting at the earth. "I did what you asked. 12, every moon, for 3 years. Eleanor, kneeling nearby, responded in a low, shaking voice. "It wants more, now." Thomas turned to her, furious. "That wasn't the pact!" Eleanor's eyes were empty. "The pact has changed." Jacob stayed hidden among the trees, watching as Thomas struck the ground with a rusted shovel. Once, twice, 3 times, like a priest ringing a bell for something beneath. The earth groaned, and the center of the circle began to sink, just slightly, just enough to show that it heard. They were no longer feeding it. They were serving it. Later that night, Eleanor came into the house alone. She walked into the pantry and removed one of Ruth's Sunday dresses, folded it, laid it on the table. Then she lit a match and burned it. No one said a word. But the next morning, the 13th grave had been dug, and no traveler had come through that week. The smell was different now. Not death, not rot. Something sweeter, like sap left too long in the sun. It hung in the corners of the house, seeped into the children's hair, their bedding, the walls. Even the wood had begun to warp, softening in the humid spring heat like it no longer wanted to hold them up. Jacob knew what had happened. There had been no traveler, no outsider. Yet the 13th grave had been filled, and Ruth's Sunday dress was gone. He counted his siblings that morning at breakfast. Ruth sat quietly beside the twins. The baby was in Eleanor's lap. But Peter, the second youngest, wasn't there. "Where's Peter?" Jacob asked. Eleanor didn't answer. Thomas chewed slowly, staring down into his plate like it held some deeper truth. Jacob stood up. "Where is he?" Thomas looked up. "You mean the boy who wandered into the woods 2 nights ago?" His voice was flat, controlled, but Jacob could see the tremble in his fingers. "You didn't even go look for him," Jacob said. "No one did." "He wasn't chosen," Eleanor murmured, "but the circle was hungry, and the one beneath doesn't wait." The baby started to cry. Jacob ran outside. The field behind the barn was quiet, but the wind was warm, unnaturally so. He walked to the edge of the circle, to the new mound of freshly turned earth. 13 now. Not 12. No longer sacred. Just more. He dropped to his knees and dug, not with his hands, but with a stick, frantic, desperate. The earth was loose, as if it had been encouraged to stay soft. Within minutes, he found cloth, a strip of flannel, yellow, Peter's. He gagged. And then he saw something else. Scratch marks in the soil, small and ragged. Peter had been buried alive. Jacob stood in the circle, fists clenched, chest heaving. No more travelers, no more strangers. Now the land wanted them. Jacob didn't speak to them for 3 days. He moved through the house like a ghost, silent, watching. He no longer sat at the table, no longer prayed when his father did, and he refused to walk near the circle. Ruth noticed first. "You're different," she whispered one night, lying beside him on the attic floor where he now slept. "You smell like outside." Jacob didn't answer. He just pulled the blanket tighter over her. Downstairs, Thomas was growing restless. His ledger had become an obsession. He opened it even during meals, writing frantically, sometimes crossing out whole lines, then rewriting them in strange new symbols. Eleanor, meanwhile, had become eerily calm, floating through the home like a shadow. She had begun speaking to the soil inside the house now, sprinkling dust near the windows, tracing the circle pattern with chalk along the baseboards. The children were scared. The baby cried more. The twins clung to each other constantly. But Jacob had a plan. That night, while Thomas and Eleanor sat silently by the fire, staring into it like it would show them a sign, Jacob crept to the barn. Beneath the floorboards was the old sack where Thomas kept the remaining coin purses. Proof. Evidence. He pulled them out one by one. Engraved initials, blood-stained cloth, a ring still slick with soil. He packed them in a satchel, wrapped in a cloth. Tomorrow, he would ride to the sheriff's office 3 towns over. He didn't trust the local one, not anymore. But just before dawn, he returned to the house and found Eleanor waiting. She stood in the doorway, eyes wide, face smeared with ash. "Where are you going, Jacob?" He lied. "Just walking." She stepped aside, but not without whispering, "You carry it in your blood. You can't walk far enough." He didn't reply, but he held the satchel tighter, because now it was war. Jacob never made it to the sheriff. The horse was gone. Its tracks led into the woods, deep, winding, and then vanished, as if swallowed. No struggle, no signs of predators. Just empty silence where something living used to be. He returned home shaken, the satchel still clutched to his chest. If they knew what he was planning, they hadn't stopped him. Yet. But the message was clear. You don't leave. You belong here. That night, the house felt colder than ever before. Even the fire didn't warm the room. Jacob stayed awake long after the others slept, listening to the sounds the walls made when no one was talking, tapping, groaning, sometimes a voice so soft he thought it was his mother's, calling his name from behind the pantry door. But Eleanor was asleep, and the pantry was locked from the inside. The next morning, Ruth pulled him aside. "They talk to me too," she whispered, her eyes darting toward the floor. "The voices in the wall." Jacob knelt in front of her, holding her trembling hands. "What do they say?" She leaned close, breath shaking. "They say the circle's too full now, that something is waking up, that it wants more." He hugged her tight. "You're not like them, Ruth. You and I. We're gonna stop this." "How?" Jacob didn't answer, because he didn't know. But that night, he followed Thomas into the barn. His father was muttering again, this time kneeling before the dirt in the center of the barn floor, which had been cleared and packed. A single candle flickered nearby. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a knife. Then he cut his palm and let the blood drip onto the ground. The earth didn't drink it. It moved. A slow rise. A pulse. The floor lifted an inch, then sank again, as if something beneath had tasted him and was displeased. Thomas stared, whispering, "It wants Jacob now." By dawn, Jacob knew his time was running out. He watched Thomas at breakfast, eyes sunken, beard matted, fingers twitching near the steak knife beside his plate. He wasn't eating, just staring, watching Jacob chew, like a man deciding how best to carve meat from bone. Eleanor didn't sit. She stood behind her husband, one hand resting on his shoulder, the other holding a pouch of dried herbs she sprinkled into the fire, herbs that smelled like sulfur and copper. The baby wailed in the other room. No one went to check. Jacob leaned in close to Ruth. "If anything happens to me," he whispered, "take the twins and run. Hide in the trees. Don't come back. But Mama's gone." That afternoon, Jacob found his father alone in the field, standing in the center of the circle, arms outstretched, head tilted to the sky like he was receiving invisible orders. Jacob stepped into the ring. The air shifted. Thomas didn't open his eyes. He just spoke. 70, that's the number. Jacob's chest tightened. 70 what? 70 mouths, Thomas said. 70 meals. That's what it asked. That's the cost of resurrection. "You're killing for a story," Jacob said, stepping forward. "No," Thomas whispered, eyes still shut. "I'm killing for a god." Then he opened his eyes, and they were bloodshot, pupils small and twitching. He lunged. Jacob was faster. He grabbed the rusted shovel at the edge of the ring and swung. It hit Thomas square in the shoulder. He screamed, stumbling backward, hands clawing the soil like it could save him. Eleanor appeared out of nowhere, shrieking, arms flailing, fingernails like claws. She clawed at Jacob's face, screaming something in that low, chant-like rhythm. The twins came running, then Ruth, screaming, confused. The baby cried louder, a high-pitched, inhuman screech that seemed to vibrate the window panes. Then, the earth cracked. Not a tremble. A fracture. A wide seam tore through the center of the ring. Steam hissed out, stinking of meat and mold. Thomas crawled toward it. Jacob grabbed Ruth and ran. He didn't look back, not yet. Jacob didn't sleep that night. He sat with Ruth and the twins in the hayloft of the old shed out back, holding them close as the wind screamed across the fields. The house, barely visible through the trees, pulsed in the moonlight, not from the lanterns, but from something inside. It glowed a dull red, like embers buried too long. Ruth trembled beside him. "Mama's not Mama anymore." "I know." She said the dirt can choose people, that it talks when you bleed on it. Jacob stared into the dark, jaw clenched. "Not anymore." At sunrise, he returned alone. The house was quiet. Too quiet. No birds, no wind, just the creak of old floorboards under his boots. He found Thomas in the study, sitting at the desk with the black ledger opened wide. His hands were bloodied, fingernails missing, eyes open but unmoving. Dead. The ledger was soaked in his final offering. On the last page, written in jagged ink, 70. We offer, we open, we live. But beside that, in smaller, messier handwriting, almost childlike, was something else. It lied. Jacob turned, heart pounding. In the kitchen, Eleanor knelt before the hearth, whispering, holding a small jar filled with what looked like teeth. Her dress was soaked through. She didn't even look up. "You shouldn't have left," she said, voice hollow. "It needed you." Jacob grabbed her shoulders. "Where's the baby?" She laughed, a broken, shattering sound. "Gone. It took him. Wanted something pure, something still soft." He felt his knees weaken, but then he saw it. The corner of the black ledger still dry, still intact. He tore it from the book and tucked it into his coat. "I'm going to the police," he said. She looked up then, her face twisted and dirt-caked, and smiled. "They already know. They just don't care. They live in land just like this. All of them." He backed away slowly. "You're insane." "No," she whispered. "I'm fed." Jacob ran, and behind him the ground cracked again, wider this time. Jacob didn't run into town. He ran to the cemetery. At the edge of the ridge, overlooking the old trail road, sat the oldest graveyard in the county, long forgotten, half sunk into the soil, its stones eaten by time. He'd only been there once as a child, when a teacher made them map local landmarks. But he remembered the name on the biggest stone, now buried to the waist in creeping moss. Edith Wilkes, 1813 to 1864. The first one who fed. Jacob's breath caught. The name. His name. His fingers dug into the mud around the base of the grave, scraping until his knuckles bled. Beneath the dirt, he found it. A rusted metal box, sealed tight. He broke it open with a nearby rock. Inside was a bundle of letters, wrapped in leather cord and sealed with wax bearing the Wilkes family crest. An eye in a circle of thorns. He read them, and the world unraveled. Edith Wilkes had been the first. The drought of 1858 had left their farm barren. Her husband dead, children starving. One night she claimed to have prayed into the ground, not to God, but to something older, something listening. And it answered, with coin, with meat, with warmth. But only after her first offering. She'd killed a traveler, a peddler, buried him beneath a cherry tree. The next morning the tree bloomed, and in its roots she found a sack of gold coins and 3 rabbit carcasses freshly gutted. From there, the killings became monthly, then yearly, then generational. The letters tracked each descendant's role, each successor. The book, the black ledger, passed down like a relic. Each child was given the chance to listen, to obey, or to disappear. Jacob felt sick. He wasn't cursed. He was chosen. The dirt hadn't just been fed by his family. It had been bred into their blood. Jacob returned home to ash. Not flames. No, the house hadn't burned, but it looked as if it had rotted in fast forward. The wooden walls had sagged in the center. Shutters hung crooked. The roof slumped like it had been exhaling for years and finally gave in. He stepped through the front door and felt it. Warmth, wet and slow, as if he had entered a throat. Ruth was gone. The twins, too. No bodies, just silence. And the ledger, now full, lay open on the table, its final entry freshly inked. 70 mouths, circle fed, heart open. Now it begins. Beneath it, scrawled in tiny shaking script, Jacob is last. He turned. The floor creaked behind him. A shadow moved across the far wall, but there was no light to cast it. The walls began to thrum, deep, rhythmic, like a pulse. Thump, thump. From beneath the floorboards, the sound rose, not footsteps, not breath. A heartbeat. Jacob staggered back as the boards warped. A wet bulge in the center of the living room floor pulsed upward, pushing the rug into the air. A long, crackling sound split the silence as the wood began to open, not break, but peel, like the house itself had skin. And beneath it, flesh. Black, slick, breathing. The circle had become a body. The offerings hadn't just summoned something. They had built it, piece by piece, bone by bone, flesh by flesh, 70 lives, 70 sacrifices. And Jacob, standing in the center, was meant to be the final blood, the spark to awaken the God his ancestors had carved into the land. He ran to the barn. The earth split open behind him, and from the center of the circle, something began to climb out. The barn door slammed behind him. Jacob dropped the bolt, chest heaving, sweat cold as snow. Outside, the world had gone quiet again. too quiet, like the land was holding its breath. But underneath the silence, the heartbeat still pounded. Thump, thump, thump. It was everywhere now, not just beneath the soil, but in the wood, in the walls, in his teeth. Every plank of this cursed farm pulsed with it, like the whole land was just skin stretched over something monstrous. He stumbled to the corner and grabbed the shovel, the same one his father had used, the same one still flecked with old blood. He didn't know what it could do, but he needed something, anything. Then he saw it. In the hayloft above, nestled in the rafters like it had grown there, was the original ledger, not the black one. The first one, older, bound in rawhide, its pages hand-stitched, letters written in ink and dried blood. He climbed, hands shaking. Inside were instructions, diagrams, names, symbols he recognized from his father's scrawl, and then one page in English, clear as day. If the 70th is not willing, the vessel will collapse. The god cannot rise on rotten soil. Jacob froze. He was the 70th, and he was not willing. That's why the ground cracked. That's why the house had warped. The resurrection was failing. He wasn't obedient. He wasn't kneeling. He knew. The land had been counting on silence, on fear. But Jacob had written his own ledger. He had seen too much. He could end it. Thump, thump, thump. The barn roof groaned. Boards splintered above him. Fingers, long, gray, wet with black fluid, pushed through the wood like roots through clay. It had shape now. Limbs. A face, eyes that didn't blink, just watched. And from the hole in the earth, a voice seeped into Jacob's mind, not in words, but in need. Submit. He gripped the shovel tighter and said, "No." Jacob ran. Not away from the creature rising from the circle, but into it. He leapt over the cracked barn floor, dashed through the yard where his siblings once played, and straight into the heart of the rot, the grave ring. It was now a crater, wide, steaming, trembling. Its edges pulsed like lips stretched into a mouth, desperate to speak, or to swallow. Below, the thing was half-born. Its body was human only in outline, a crude mimicry sculpted from dozens of stitched limbs, skulls, bones ground to pulp, wrapped in black-red tendons that shimmered with stolen blood. The faces of the dead twisted along its chest and back, screaming, laughing, silent, still aware. At its center, a hollow cavity, glowing red, where Jacob was meant to go, where the 70th belonged. The wind howled, lightning split the sky. From the shattered farmhouse, Eleanor crawled through the dirt on bleeding hands, whispering the chant in a broken loop. He is flesh, he is root, he is return, he is flesh. Jacob raised the shovel and stepped to the edge of the crater. "No!" he shouted. At her, at it, at everything. The creature reared back, arms twitching, mouths gasping across its form. The soil beneath Jacob's feet softened, tried to pull him in, but he was ready. He pulled the stolen ledger from his coat. His ledger. Not the family's, not the God's, the one he'd written, in secret. Truth, not worship. He tore out the final page and tossed the book into the pit. The reaction was immediate. The ground screamed. A real, thunderous shriek that split the earth and sky. The creature convulsed, flailing, not in power but in panic. It couldn't complete the ritual without the 70th submission. Jacob's refusal was the rot in the foundation, and rot spreads. The grave ring collapsed in on itself, swallowing bodies, earth, stones, and the god. Eleanor screamed once, high and sharp, then fell silent as the earth folded over her like a mouth finally finished with its meal. The land cracked one last time, then went still. No more heartbeat, no more whispers. just silence. 1 year later. The farmhouse is gone, reclaimed by weeds. The barn collapsed, never rebuilt. Locals call it cursed land. They don't go near. The sheriff found Jacob wandering the road, barefoot and dazed. He never told the full truth. No one would have believed him. But he handed over the stolen coin purses, the watches, the rings, proof enough of something awful. Authorities exhumed 72 bodies. They said it was the work of madmen. They weren't wrong. Jacob lives alone now, miles away, under a false name. But in his drawer is a final page he kept. It is fed, but never full. If it calls again, someone must refuse. He stares at it sometimes and listens, just to be sure. So far, the earth has been quiet.